says about us. You're forgiven. You're a person of grace. You're a person who I love. And sometimes when we come to grips with that, that's a good thing. The second lyric that I heard today, and it actually literally, when we were singing it, put a cold chill on my spine. It said, I believe you are coming on the clouds, but I believe that you are present even now. I love that lyric. I don't know if that means anything to you, but that caused a cold shiver to go up my spine. That the God of creation chooses to be present with us. And that we sometimes anticipate this coming and forget that he's with us right now. I want you to turn with me to the Gospel of Luke again. We're going to go to chapter 20, and we're going to start with verse 9. But let me give you a little bit of preliminary to where we're going. Jesus has gone into the temple. He has gone into Jerusalem on the triumphal entry. Remember a couple of Sundays ago we talked about Jesus entering Jerusalem. And one of the first things he did was he cleaned out the temple. And last week, if you remember, we had a little object lesson about what that meant and why they were changing money in the temple. I was so impressed when I left because Dan Luter said he actually learned something that morning. And I thought that I had finally arrived, 17 years, and Dan finally grabbed onto something there. But it was kind of a cool little illustration. Remember about the original lamb that's left there to be sold to the next guy and so forth. And Jesus now, after turning the tables over in the temple, is now teaching. And we believe, at least some of the theologians who write on the Gospel of Luke, believes that he's just answering questions. That maybe his disciples are beginning to question some things. Maybe there are some others who are followers of Jesus who are questioning some things. But he begins to do these teachings, and Luke records a couple of those teachings. And one of the more interesting ones is found in the Gospel of Luke. It's about the vine growers. So turn with me to verse 9, chapter 20 of Luke. I want to read it in its entirety. Then I want to go back and kind of give you some relationships that come out of this passage. And maybe you'll find yourself in one of those relationships. And he began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and rented it out to vine growers and went on a journey for a long time. At the harvest time, he sent a slave to the vine growers so that they would give him some of the produce of the vineyard. But the vine growers beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And he proceeded to send another slave, and they beat him also and treated him shamefully and sent him away empty-handed. And he proceeded to send a third, and this one also they wounded and cast out. You need to understand that each one of those becomes more violent. Okay, it's important that you understand that each one of those three slaves, the response becomes more violent. The owner of the vineyard said, what shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Perhaps they will respect him. But when the vine growers saw him, they reasoned with one another, saying, this is the heir. Let us kill him so that the inheritance will be ours. So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy these vine growers and will give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it, they said, may it never be. But Jesus looked at them and said, what then is this that is written? The stone which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone. And everyone who falls on that stone will be broken into pieces. But on whomever it falls, it will scatter them like dust. The scribes and the chief priests tried to lay hands on him that very hour. And they feared the people, and they understood that he spoke this parable against them. Now, that's a pretty strange parable. There's places where we've heard that taught before. There's a vineyard that's been rented. It's not owned. It's not been sold. It's been rented to some vine growers. The vine growers, it would have been a custom of the day that the owner of the land could send and get a product of the land. Just because they rented the land did not necessarily mean that everything they grew on the land was actually theirs. That it would be a custom for the owner of the land to send and get a little bit of the product of whatever was being grown on the land. So the time came, and the vine dressers are ready. They're about to reap the crop, and the slave shows up from the owner of the property. Says the owner would like to have a little bit of grapes. And they said, oh yeah, they beat him up, sent him on his way. Now we assume that that slave went back to the owner and said, they beat me up and sent me back. And so he said, I'll send another slave. And so he sent another slave, and the other slave went in, said the owner of the land would like to have a few grapes. And so they beat him up, and the terminology there is more severely than the last. And they sent him on his way, and he went back and said, they beat me up and sent me back home. I'll send a third. He sends a third slave. And some believe that the slaves are now increasing in stature, that the first was a bond slave or a lowly slave, and that the last slave was sent may have been a household slave, the highly respected slave. And so he comes and says, the master needs a few of your grapes, would like to have a few grapes from the land. And the guy says, nope, we're going to just beat you up like we did the other, and we're going to cast you out. The idea behind that is that they treated him more violently than the other two. And so the owner of the land says, what am I going to do? How am I going to do? What am I going to do? I know what I will do. I will send, and hear the words, my beloved son. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten, beloved Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. I will send my beloved Son. And so the Son comes, and listen to the logic. Listen to what the text says. He sent his heir. This is the guy that's going to own the property when the old man dies. I tell you what, let's do. Let's kill him. And then the property will become ours. Now, it's there that you begin to understand this. They had failed to become renters at this point. They were claiming ownership to something that they had no ownership over. Understood? Now, let's talk about that for a moment. Do you know anybody that is a tenant acting like an owner? That's what these folks were doing. They were tenants acting like owners. They did not own the land. It wasn't theirs to make decisions on. They had been renting it. They had the ability to do something with it. They could plant grapes. They could reap those grapes. They could sell those grapes. But they did not own the property. Do you know one of those things that's becoming popular out west right now are squatters? Have you been reading about this? People will go to where people take long extended vacations and they break into their house and they stay there for a period of time. And if they stay there a long enough time, they get squatters' rights and they can actually take the property. Well, that don't sound right, does it? Neither did this. A tenant trying to become the owner. Have you ever known a passenger acting like they were the driver? These are the three relationships. Tenants that want to be owners are acting like owners, and passengers that are acting like drivers. I do that. I don't care who you are. If I am in the car and you are driving, there will be times I'll put on the brakes. Right? Bruce, does Jane do that to you? Yep. I think it's a husband-wife thing. There's always somebody who's really not in control of the vehicle, but really acts like they're in control of the vehicle. Put on the brakes. You're going too fast. Are you going to make that turn? Are you lost? Do you know where you're going? And sometimes you just want to say, will you just shut up and let me drive? Or do you want to drive? I'll stop right. I've done that to Jan. I'll stop right now and let you drive. I'll get out. You can drive all you want to. Then I'll become the passenger acting like I'm the driver. You know that role, don't you? And so you've got these guys who are not in control of their futures, who think they're in control. They know where they're going. They know what they're going to happen there. They don't have to be responsible to the driver. The third relationship that's really kind of interesting is a stranger acting as if they're an heir. Here's somebody that has absolutely no right to the master's inheritance, who are saying to them, if we do certain things, if we get rid of his heir, if we get rid of his son, then we will become the inheritors of his estate. In every one of these places is somebody who has no rights trying to claim rights that's not theirs. What did that mean? The very last verse says, they knew that he was talking about them. What did that mean? By this time, the Pharisaical Jews had become so dominant that they were no longer tenants of what God had given to them. They were claiming ownership. They were tenants who now said, we don't need the owner anymore. We can make decisions irregardless of what the owner decides. Now, folks, in our lives, when we become owners instead of tenants, we're already moving outside the realm. The realm is very simple. God is our creator. We are the creation. That never changes. Never. There's never a point where the creation becomes equal with the creator. And there's never a point when the creation takes the place of the creator, except in our minds and in our spirit sometimes. Listen to Job for a moment. The story of Job is a wonderful story of how Job loses everything. Do you like the way? Read Job chapter 1 sometimes if you haven't done it. It's a great story. It says, and when the B'nai Elohim in the Hebrew, when the sons of God were entering into the courtroom of God, Satan was among them. And Satan has a conversation with God, where God says to Satan, Satan, what you been doing? He says, I've been walking across the earth to and fro. Now, the insinuation there is that Satan's walking around looking at man, trying to point out that man was a total flop. That God's experiment by creating man was wrong and terribly gone bad. And then God says to Satan, read the text, have you considered my servant Job? Now, what was God saying? He said, Satan, you've been trying to tell me that man doesn't live up to the expectations that I want from them, but Job looks like he's doing a pretty good job of it. Have you considered my servant Job? It is God who brings up the name of Job. Satan doesn't say, hey, let me take a shot at Job. Satan had never even heard of Job. We don't get that because he turns around and says, yeah, but you got a hedge of protection around him. Take your protection away from him, and I'll cause him to curse you and die. Have you been there? Sure we have. We've all had those crises of faith in our lives where we feel like the protection that God has around us has disappeared, and now things are happening in our lives and we can't figure out why God's letting those things happen to us. The story says that all of Job's children die, all of his barns burned down, all of his crop was destroyed, and that Satan did everything humanly possible to make life miserable for Job. It's real interesting. He left his wife. I'm going to make life miserable for Job. I'm just going to let your wife stay right there with you. That'll make you curse God and die. Wow. And she begins the story. What have you done? You've done something. You've made God mad. If you hadn't made God mad, this wouldn't have happened to you. And somewhere Job said, oh, I wish they'd have taken her too. She just started that nagging. And then Job's 3 friends comes because she probably has sent word to his friends, come talk to Job. He's messed up really bad and God's getting him. And so Job's 3 friends show up. Bildad, Eliphaz, remember those guys? And they sit down and they begin to say to Job, Job, what have you done? You've obviously done something really, really, really bad. You have offended the Creator so bad that he's causing all this misery go on to you. What you ought to do is just seek his forgiveness and stop doing whatever it is that you've done and see if that'll resolve it. But Job keeps saying this over and over again. If God were here, if God would look me in the eye, he would have to say, I've done nothing wrong. Most of us are right there. Okay? Most of us are tenants acting like owners. Do you understand? Read the last chapters of Job, and God comes to Job in a whirlwind. Not a sweet stall voice, not whispering in his ear, not sent a pastor to be compassionate towards him. In a whirlwind, God appears face to face with Job. Remember what he says to Job? Job, get up and gird yourself. What does that mean? That means pull your robe up between your legs and tie it around your waist. Free your legs, because we're going to wrestle. Or you're going to run. Where were you, Job, when I hung the stars in the sky? Now let's just all put ourselves in Job's shoes, sandals there for a few moments. Where were you, Steve? Where were you when I created the universe? Where were you when I hung the stars in the sky? Where were you when I created animal life? Who died and made you boss? When did you become a tenant who thought you owned anything? What was God saying to Job? I created you. I am the creator. You're the creation. You don't stand eye to eye with me. You don't stand toe to toe with me. You don't ever get to be equal with me. You don't ever become the owner. I'm the owner. I'm the creator. You're just the creation. What had happened in that day? Those Pharisees thought they had owned it. That no longer was God interactive in their lives. They just started telling people what they wanted them to do. They were tenants. They were renting. They were given this to be stewards of, and now they thought they were on equal par with the owner of the vineyard. We can make decisions about the product, not you. It's no longer yours. It's now ours. Folks, anytime in your life when it's no longer God's and it's become yours, you're tenants trying to become owners. God never said, I'll give it to you. God never said, you can have it. Now, later on, there's a little bit of a story that changes that. But at this point, God has given us stewardship. We're not the owners of our lives. The very air that you breathe, God gives to you. The very life that you live, God gives to you. Which of you, if God wanted you in his presence right now, which one of you can stop that? If God demanded all of his stuff back, which of you can stop that? Can you imagine Job walking out there and saying, all this is mine, and then all of a sudden it all disappeared? Why? Because it was God's, not his. He was just a tenant who thought he was the owner. In your spiritual lives, please, 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 please don't ever think that you become an owner. God's the creator. We're the creation. He gives us, graciously gives to us, more than we can ever imagine. But at the point that you and I forget that we're just tenants, it's when we begin to falter in our walk with God. Anytime that we think that this is ours, that this earth is our home, that what we've accumulated really is ours, it doesn't take an awful lot of time before us to become Jobs. When things are taken away, and we want to stand face to face with God, and we want to say to God, who gave you the right to do that? I've done nothing wrong. I didn't deserve that. If Job was a perfect human individual, God still had the right to do what he did because God's God. He's the creator, and Job is just a part of the creation. Second part of it is it's these passengers trying to act like they are the drivers. Because now the owner is dictating an action. The owner sends his slave and says to the tenants, hey, I would like to have a few grapes. Now, he wasn't trying to take everything because it wasn't his to take. But it was still his property. He still owned the property. Even the vines that grew on the property, he owned. He was renting them. And just because they were in the role of renter did not mean that he couldn't come and say, I'd like to have a few grapes off my own property. Most people would have graciously done that to the landlord, but not them, because they wanted to drive their own futures. They wanted to drive their own direction. No longer were they in the will of the owner. They were now determining that what they wanted was far more important than what the owner wanted. Have you ever become a passenger trying to become or thinking that you're the driver? I read it was a trivia thing. I think it was probably on Jeopardy, because I like to play Jeopardy on television, particularly if it's a rerun and I already know the answers. That helps a lot. It makes you look real important. The other day I was just naming them all off there, and Jan said, "Boy, you're good at this." I didn't tell her I'd seen the show beforehand, but sometimes you get out there and you really think that you're real smart. And there was one of them that said that this guy wrote a book and that it was entitled "God as My," what's the blank? We all know that. We didn't have to know anything about it. If they just put "God as my blank" up there, we'd all said co-pilot, because that's it. Let me tell you something. God has never taken the role of co-pilot. Amen? He's the pilot. He's always been the pilot. He's always been the one determining the direction and how the plane's going to go and what direction we're going to go. When we relegate God to a co-pilot status, or we move him into a secondary seat, we're passengers trying to become drivers. We can't do that. We must, in turn, submit ourselves to the one who is our creator, who's made that known to us, that he's the creator and we're the creation. He's God, we're the servants, and that he directs where things go. I just wish God would have consulted me when he started doing some things. I really think that I could have made things easier for God. Have you ever been there? You read a Bible story and you say, he could have done it a better way. Or you read about the history of Israel and you say, boy, that could have been cut down to a few years as over against thousands of years. Why do you have to spend 40 years in the wilderness? Gee whiz, it could have been done in at least a year or two. And you begin to think that you know better how the car is being driven, and you begin to say to God, really, if you just let me drive, I know better. The mistakes that every one of us made is that we were passengers who were trying to become drivers. That is what sin is in our lives. Sin is not what we do. We often say that lying, cheating, stealing, and we have all these big lists of things that we call sins. You need to start forgetting that. Those are the symptoms of sin. Sin is when we tell God, we want you to be the co-pilot, we'll just drive and have you along as a convenience. In other words, God, you just sit there quietly, I'll go where we're going to go, and if I need you, I'll wake you up. If it looks like I'm in a wreck, I'll let you know that I need your help. If it looks like I've got lost somewhere, I'll wake you up and you can direct. And that becomes sin when we begin to direct our own lives. Much like these tenants were saying to the owner, we'll give grapes to whoever we choose to give grapes to. We're determining what's going on in our lives. You, as the owner of the property, do not. That's called open rebellion against God. So at some point, I tell God, you're now the co-pilot. I tell God, as a matter of fact, why don't you get in the back seat? I know how this train's run. I know where this car is going. I can fly this plane by myself. I really, honestly don't need your directions in my life. Then have you ever become an heir and you're really a stranger? A stranger acting like they're the heir? I will send my beloved son. We all know what's being said here. The Pharisaical Jews had become the owners, at least they thought. They also no longer needed direction from God because there's Jesus teaching and they haven't heard a word that he said. Nor did they hear the prophets that preceded them. So slave 1, slave 2, slave 3 is prophet 1, prophet 2, prophet 3. And one by one, systematically, if you read the stories of the prophets, they were beaten, they were cast out, they were rejected. What am I going to do? God says, I will send my beloved son. Surely they will hear him. Can you imagine when Jesus got to that part in the story? Maybe he even said, and God sent his beloved son. Woo! I believe he's present even now. God, the owner, sent his beloved Son. And as a prophetic tone, what did they do? They killed him, thinking that they would become heirs. What had the Pharisees plotted? It's better for us, for one man to die, than to all of us lose our wealth. Or all of us lose our popularity. Or all of us lose our prestige as the religious leaders of Judaism. It's better that this one guy die so that we can inherit the benefits. Jesus was telling his own story in the form of tenants and an owner. And the owner sent his beloved Son, and they killed him. But what happened? The stone which the builders rejected became the chief cornerstone. You know what Jesus did? He reached back in Scripture that they were all familiar with. He said, remember that prophet who said that one day there'll be a stone and you're going to build the building, and before you get to the ending of the building, you're going to throw away the chief cornerstone. You're going to get rid of it because you don't think it's important. And then when you get to the end of the project, the stone that you threw away becomes the most important part of the building. The stone that you're about to get rid of is going to come back. Listen how he said it. Those of you that trip over the stone and are broken. Okay, there'll be some of you that will step on the stone and will be broken into pieces. But on whomever it falls, it will scatter him like dust. Which would you rather be? The one who stumbles across the rock and is broken, or the one that the rock falls on? I hear it from my wife. Broken. Wow. I want to cross Jesus, and when I cross Jesus, I want to be broken. I want to be broken of sorrow. I want to be broken because I'm sinful. I want to be broken because I've tried to become an owner and I've tried to become a driver, and I've even seen myself as an heir to the throne. But when I come face to face with Jesus, I am broken. What does it mean? It means that those who are broken get put back into beautiful pieces. That Jesus stands as the stone that breaks us. Not because he wants to hurt us, but because we are broken within. We're broken because of our sinfulness. We're broken because we've been selfish. We're broken because we've become hateful individuals. We're broken because we've tried to be the owner. We've been trying to be equal with God, and all of a sudden, all of that is broken inside of us. I attended a convention one year in South Carolina, and in Columbia and Township Auditorium, if I'm not mistaken, maybe at the Coliseum there. I can't remember where we were, but it was a big deal about the names of God. It was one of those things that just seemingly was kind of catching in all of our churches. And one of the choirs of one of the big churches, might have been First Baptist Columbia, was being led, and they were singing through the names of God. And we were all, it was a big choir, impressive. And then they started bringing these banners from way up in the aisles. And they kept coming down, and they would put those banners, the Lion of Judah. And we'd all think that was a wonderful banner and all of that. But there was a moment in that song when they began to talk about the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And the most beautiful banner of them all began to appear way up in the balcony and make its way down. It was white. It glowed as it came down. It had a train that filled the temple. There was that moment when the shiver of the spine became the minor part of our lives. Every one of us in that building were broken. Every one of us in that building were filled with tears. It was just a symbolic presence of Christ. But could we have stood if Christ himself walked among us. If a banner and a song and just the image of that could so break our hearts, could we have stood to stand in the presence of his beloved Son? Do you understand what I'm saying? I want to be broken. I want to be on my knees. I want to know that I am not the creator. I'm not the owner. I want to know that I'm just a passenger. I'm not the driver. I want to know that he is the heir. You know why? Because if that rock falls on you, it crushes you. If you're not broken, you'll be crushed. That's what Jesus said. But you know what? For those that are broken, he reaches down, picks up the pieces, puts it back together, takes something ugly and makes something beautiful out of it. And he says, you know who you are? I am who you say I am. Who am I? You're now forgiven and a joint heir of everything I have. Did you hear that? Everything that the tenants wanted was in their reach, except they rebelled against the heir. Jesus takes up and puts the pieces together. Several years ago, do you remember the name Norman Schwarzkopf? Desert Storm. We all were taken back by that. And one day on television, he's giving a press conference, and he's saying, here's what happened. Here's the Iraqi front line. We sent a bunch of tanks right up the middle, and we blew a hole in there. And then we sent tanks everywhere, and they spread out. And they kept telling us that we were going to find a strong army of resistance. And what he said, didn't exist. When we went in there, they just started surrendering left and right. They just started throwing their weapons down and running for home. But then he said, we came across one little stronghold. And that little stronghold, they just weren't surrendering. We asked them to on several occasions. We sent several emissaries. We sent slave number 1, slave number 2, slave number 3. Prophet number 1, prophet number 2, prophet number 3. Finally, we sent an officer to try to get them to surrender, and they continued to resist. And so we just put a tank right up on next to that outpost. He said when that tank stood there and the turret of that tank began to turn and face that place. You follow me here? The glory of the United States infantry and cavalry was in this huge tank with a big turret on it. Could have annihilated that whole section right there, and everybody knew it. It's God in all of his glory standing in front of us. And now he says, stand up and look me in the eye. And we see this huge rock that's about to fall on us. This huge, powerful entity that can destroy us at will. Do you remember how that story unfolded? Norman Schwarzkopf said that when the tank's turret aimed in on them, they came out with their hands in the air. They threw their weapons to the side. They were told, get down on your knees and place your hands behind your head. And they got down on their knees and they put their hands behind their heads. They were broken. He said our soldiers went over there, took all their weapons, threw them way off to the side, told them to get up and go home. Grace, grace, God's grace. The owner owns the property, not you. The driver drives our vehicles, not us. His Son is the heir, not you. But once you're broken, once you are repentant, once you realize that God is all that, he says, neither do I condemn you. Go. Not only that, I'm going to make you joint heirs with my beloved Son. Everything that he inherits, you'll inherit also. Well, gee whiz, if it's that simple, it is that simple. It's our willingness to stop trying to be the owner. It's our willingness to stop trying to drive the car. And it's our willingness not to want to be the heir. And when we are fallen broken upon the stone, the chief cornerstone, the thing that matters most in all of our eternities, God says to us, I'm going to make you owner. I'm going to make you joint heirs with my beloved Son. That's a great story. I love that story, how Jesus told it. I just think that he stood there and he said, and God sent his beloved Son. And you don't even see him. You don't even understand. You don't even know who's standing in your presence right now. You know what they're going to do? They're going to kill that beloved Son. But that chief cornerstone, when it's all said and done and you think you've become the owner and you think you're driving your own car and you think you've inherited it all of a sudden that stone's going to come back. That stone is going to confront you. And you're either going to be broken by that stone or you'll be crushed by that stone. It's your choice. Father, remind us this story rings even true today. That we stand in the midst of a God of glory. A God who owns it all, drives it all, and it will inherit it all. We're just part of the creation. Father, forgive us when we've tried to become the owner. Forgive us when we've tried to drive, and forgive us when we've destroyed your beloved Son thinking that we would be the heirs. That the only the only inheritance that we receive is when we acknowledge that the Son is who he says he is. The only way that we ever inherit anything from you is to become a joint heir with him. I'm so proud today to say I'm with him, Lord. I've done nothing to achieve. I've done nothing to accomplish. I've done nothing to earn. I've been broken by the stone. And so blessed that you have put the stone back together. Put my life back together. Made something beautiful out of something ugly. And now you declare me a joint heir with the one you sent. May that be our heart today. In Christ we pray. Amen.